Hey there everybody, this won't be exactly like my usual content, but today I'm going to be talking about Eternal Strands, an upcoming action RPG. As part of the Yellowbrick Games partner program, I was invited to playtest an early build of Eternal Strands. I've been waiting for a while to talk about this, but first there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. First of all, my time with the game and the footage you're going to be seeing are very early builds of the game. This footage also is not mine. While we were allowed to record for feedback purposes, me as well as other creators who were a part of this were provided with footage by the developers to use for the time being. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to Yellowbrick Games for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this, and if you enjoy the video, feel free to drop a like. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below. Anyways, let's get into the game. For the uninitiated, Eternal Strands is an action RPG with a heavy focus on world interaction, epic creatures, and exploration. Think of it sort of like a cross between the exploration of Breath of the Wild and the boss elements of Shadow of the Colossus. It's being developed by Yellowbrick Games, an indie studio with industry veterans ranging from BioWare, Ubisoft, Larian, and more. I'll try and match up footage the best I can, but it is only a couple minutes that we were provided with, so you might see some repeated stuff as well. As our time was fairly limited with the demo, this won't be super in-depth, but I'll of course discuss how the game looks so far, some specifics, and everything you need to know moving forward. What I was most excited for before I even played it was the exploration, those big monsters, and the elemental abilities that are in the game. We'll touch on all that and more, but first we'll talk about exploration. What we experienced in the demo so far was great. There were two areas showcased in the build. The first was a small hub area with some NPCs with a teleporter that led to the second, a ruined city type section with some enemies in one of the game's epics. The first area definitely felt like a lot was blocked off, like there was a lot more still to see that we just weren't allowed to, which was okay. Here we could change our armor and weapons, and the game's very pretty world design showed through wonderfully. The second section was the clear highlight though. I mean, for one, it was beautiful, and it was very exciting to explore using those elemental abilities, which we'll talk about more later. I'm not sure if this goes for all of the discoverable items, but they seem to be tied in some way to how you obtain them. One of my favorite examples came with an ice two-hander I was able to get my hands on. This is something else I don't have footage of, so I'll just describe it the best I can. At one part of the map I found a building blocked off by a growth of ice, but using fire spells I was able to get in there, which rewarded me with an ice enchanted weapon. It's not a huge thing, but I really liked that the reward felt thematic to where it was hidden. Our time with the build was, again, fairly limited, so I didn't get the chance to explore as much as I would have liked. This could mean a lot of rewards are like this, but I'm not really sure right now. This will be a common theme, but I feel like I need to see more. So far though, exploration is very fun. This will probably be the longest section by a lot, but for combat we'll start on weapons. There are 3 weapon types, at least as far as I'm aware. For each type, we were then given 2 variants to start, one that was just normal and one with an element. The first was a sword and shield, which was the lighter of the 2 melee options. The elemental variant we were given for this was ice. This was then followed by the two-hander, a heavy glaive type weapon which wielded fire. This one was my favorite, so most of my thoughts on melee combat will center around the glaive. The third weapon was of course the bow and arrow, which had the void element attached to it. I believe they called it kinetic, but that's the purple one. As far as I'm concerned, these all felt pretty good. I didn't use the sword and shield very much at all, so I don't have any thoughts specifically on that. Starting with the glaive though, this one was again my favorite by far. It was a ton of fun to use. As the heavy weapon option, I was looking for something big that hit wide, and it felt like it had some weight to it, so this checked all of those boxes for me. My favorite moves with this was a rolling uppercut and this airborne dive attack that were all really fun and felt pretty strong, but on top of those was the elemental attack. Since each weapon type can be sort of imbued with one of the 3 elements, they also have a signature using that element. With the two-hander, our character sort of swings it around in a circle, which spews like radial flames, which again was just pretty sick. I believe the sword and shield variant we had sent this like wave of ice along the ground, but I didn't experiment with it a whole lot. Moving on to the bow, I don't have a whole lot to say about this one either. It had a charged shot and an uncharged shot, of course, and then you can aim it as well. This one has the void element on it, which resulted in fully charged shots spawning this black hole orb that sucked things in and did some damage. I did have one issue with the bow though, and that has to do with the camera. Now the camera in third-person games are always a point of contention, and it was mostly good, but I know a couple of other creators had some problems with the target lock, but I didn't have any issues with it. Now pretty much all of my issues or praise was relayed to the devs, as with everyone else, so any issues are almost certainly subject to change. In fact, last I heard, they'd already implemented some of the stuff they got out of the focus groups, which, is great. Anyways, one of my biggest issues with the bow was that you can use the target lock to all but guarantee a hit whether you charge it fully or just tap fire it, and I didn't really like that much. My suggestion was to force charge shots to be free aim but allow target lock to work for tap firing, since charge shots are obviously going to be higher damage and more precise. I felt that it would make more sense to need to earn your hits, so to speak. I also had some issues with sensitivity. Most of my time with the demo was on a gamepad, which I'm already not used to. I play all of my games on mouse and keyboard, but I had some difficulty aiming the bow and then some of the abilities. One of my suggestions for this would be to add separate sensitivity sliders for each spell, the bow, and the camera. It might be a bit more work, but I think it would do wonders for the player's experience. Lastly, in this section, I'd like to discuss the bosses. Now, there was only one in our build, but it was a really cool preview of what's to come, and it definitely lived up to the promises that they've made so far. He was called the Ark of the Living Flame. This flaming behemoth not only looked awesome, but it posed quite the challenge. Personally, I didn't even get the chance to beat him, partially because I'm pretty terrible on controller, and also because I hopped in the demo towards the end of the time slot. One of my favorite things about the epics, however, is your ability to break specific pieces on the boss, netting you extra rewards. Think like in Monster Hunter, where you cut off a tail or you break a certain body part. Apparently, these extra materials will be used to obtain and upgrade your elemental spells. Overall, the combat is shaping up very well. I don't have much more to say about it, and I can't wait to see what else they have in store. Sort of looped in with the combat though, the last thing I'd like to touch on are the elemental abilities themselves. For each of the 3 elements, we were given 3 abilities to try out. The standouts for me was this ice beam you could spray to lay down a wall. Fire's simplest spell was a flamethrower, which wasn't anything crazy, I just enjoyed it, and then the kinetic category had 2 that I was a big fan of. The first was this black hole, very similar to the ability that was tagged onto the void bow, and the other is arguably way cooler, which allows you to pick up most objects scattered around and launch them at enemies or just like into space, whatever you want really. This was a really fun addition, and I'm so excited to see how it's expanded in the full game. In reality, this is hardly the tip of the iceberg when it comes to environmental interactions, but it worked well for me. This section is not super long because, in all honesty, I thought everything worked quite well. I do have a couple of suggestions though. For one, I think the ice wall should come out a bit faster. There's sort of a buffer between when the beam hits the surface and when the wall itself spawns, so I kept trying to sort of skate on it like Frozone, but it just wasn't working because of the delay. And I think this could be a really neat way to add some player expression, as I kept trying to save myself from falls with it as well, but it just wasn't working because of that delay. I wish I could show footage of it because it's kind of funny and pretty embarrassing, but I'm not allowed right now. My other gripe would definitely benefit the ice wall too, but it would be useful on all the spells, and that would be some kind of trajectory indicator for them. A couple of them are sort of difficult to tell where they'll go, like this one Frostbomb ability, so I think adding something to assist in that would be nice. Yellow Brick actually mentioned this themselves, and the more I've thought about it, the more I want it. All of the spells, though, felt good to use and were super unique from one another, which is hard when you constrain them to an element, so they did a great job with that. But yeah, I think that's about it. There's a good chance I missed some stuff because I cobbled this video together pretty fast. It might be a bit rushed, but if you have any questions about any part of the game, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll answer to the best of my ability. Regardless, thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to Yellow Brick Games once again for inviting me to this, and wishlist Eternal Strands on Steam. Thank you all for tuning in, have a great night, and I'll catch you in the next one.